Greetings. Welcome to Powered by Nyame. I'm your guide and host, Kwesi Kunadu. On this episode, our focus will be on getting old and being alone. Now, I'm going to begin with a story, and I'll tell you another one in the course of this episode, but I'll begin with this story. Two friends of mine were having a conversation. Yes, I was at the same table, but I was more so listening. I wasn't really a part of it. One, and these are two men. One was married, the other was not. And in full, details, the one that was married had been so for a number of years. The other that wasn't married had not been married, and so he lived a life of a single man. The single one was older than the other one. Now, you can probably imagine we are probably somewhere between our 30s and our 40s, maybe early 50s. Suffice to say, as I'm listening to these two have their conversation, because I was just listening to them, didn't feel any point that I would enter the conversation because it really wasn't about me, but I listened. And this is what I heard from them, and this is what I think is important for all of us. So the older guy says to the younger guy that, he has his life where he's single, he meets a lot of women, he has a lot of time, doesn't have the responsibility of children, and he can move and fly and drive and, go there and do this. And he's also an entertainer, and so he has an added bonus, I suppose, of being in front of audiences quite often. Now, younger guy, by only a few years, is receiving all this and is like, man, I wish I had some of that. By some, he meant, wish he had some of that quote unquote freedom, some of that irresponsibility in the sense of not having responsibility rather than being irresponsible. He also, I think in a way, envied the older guy because he seemed that he had a certain life that was desirable rather than his own marriage. Now, let's bring this in. Let's reel all this in. You see, I'm going to share with you what the older guy tells him, toward the end of this video. But I want to give you at least a few nuggets or gems from that conversation as I listen carefully. You see, what you never do in and out of a relationship, whether you're in one or you're about to be in one, potentially, you never compare yourself to another person's relationship. Never do that. So whether it's a marriage or just simply some kind of committed relationship, you never compare yours to theirs. You will always lose. And in fact, in life, you never compare yourself to anyone else because you will always lose. An imitation can't be the real thing being the thing or the person to which you can do the comparison. And so comparisons are always a trap, a death trap, in fact. Second takeaway is that the life of the older guy seems glamorous, and some parts of it is. But there's also glamour and comfort and happiness and joy, potentially, within married life. Yes, it's not simply just the day-to-day get up, you may speak, get the children ready if you have any, drop them off to school, go to work, or a bus picks them up, go to work, come home from work, both or one is tired, one or both may cook or order out, eat dinner. You two may talk, meaning the adults. The children do their homework and they're off to bed, and then you two are off to bed. He started all over again, right? Marriage is not really so. However, for some it can be. And you can see, therefore, from that perspective, why the other older guy's life seems much more exciting than his own. Now, what's it to do with old age and getting lonely? Everything. You see, these guys are between late 30s and early 50s, right? And as they age, in marriage or without one, both are faced with the same challenge, the challenge of companionship, right? Because you can be married to someone and A, not know them for who they really are, B, be strangers living in the same house, occupying the same room, and even sharing the same bed. And C, you can be married and still have the lifestyle and attitude of a single person, right? And in fact, many of us carry singledom into married life and sort of try to make, one fit into the other, sort of proverbial square into the donut hole. And so, because both these types of men face the same challenge of companionship, as we get older, into our 40s, into our 50s, sort of the midpoint in the century mark, we, human beings, men and women, but sometimes for different reasons, but whatever the reason is, desire companionship, all right? We don't want to sleep with the other side of the bed cold. And oftentimes we will settle and compromise our values and principles, if we had everything to begin with, just to have a warm body on the other side of the bed. Whether that body spends the night, whether that body spends a few minutes or a few hours or a few years or a lifetime, we want a warm body sharing the other side of the bed. And hopefully a little bit closer than that. The other takeaway from these two men talking is that old age has certain inevitabilities. Your physical features that you had when you were 20s are not going to be there. I'm talking about the whatever, your breast size, your butt size, your physique, your tummy, if you're a man, that is your abdomen, your stomach, all those things, the muscles you used to have, right? Worn out by years of fried chicken and French fries and fast food. All those things begin to change, begin to morph, right? Even if you have an impeccable vegan, plant-based, or whatever diet you may have, you still have to confront the challenge of old age. In fact, that's why people have those diets, to slow down in their minds the onset of losing some of the muscle mass that you've attained in your 20s, in your 30s, by the time you get to your 40s and 50s. Losing some of the quickness, the virility, the sharpness of mind, losing some of the physical attributes, right? If you're a male and if you're a female. And especially if you are a woman that have multiple children, multiple childbirths, you begin to also not only gain a certain kind of weight that doesn't go away or evaporate as quickly as it used to if you were in your early 20s. Is for women who have children older or have multiple children over a span, let's say, of a decade or more. Those things begin to add on and they don't go away as fast. Metabolism slows down tremendously. The same workout is much more harder to accomplish, right? And the gains are less. And so, faced with all this, both men, I presumed, began to think about, what is there to look forward to getting older and being alone potentially. Now, let me tell you another story. This story is about Africa. You see, Africa is the only continent, that is large landmass that I'm aware of present day, that has one of the youngest populations in the world. In fact, Africa is a youth continent, meaning over half of the net population, we're talking about just over 2 billion people that occupy the landmass called the continent of Africa, just about, and more than 50% are 25 and under, and even more 30 and under. So this is a youth population, right? Young people's population. However, here's the irony. Youngest population with the oldest set of leadership, meaning the presidents, they are in their 70s and 80s and some pushing 90. So Africa has a distinction of having one of the youngest population and ironically having one of the oldest set of political leaders across the continent. Of course, this compares to the world. What does that mean? It means there is a serious disconnect between the younger and young generations of people who have different desires and aspirations in their youth, as they should, than those that are more settled and content and even comfortable on their perch of power and authority. But more importantly, the point is that they too, who are occupying seats of power, are lonely, which is why each regime, each political occupant or government, with some nuances here and there, but for the most part, this is across the entire continent, this is true, Each regime usually, and this is across the world, by the way, it happens in the United States, it happens in China. Well, China doesn't have elections, so but it happens in terms of what I'm referring to. Each political regime, each incoming class, right? Um, they have to denigrate and essentially, you know, try to rid the memory of the previous regime as a platform for their own power. In other words, they have to make the previous regime look the worst and the most awful and the most inept as a way to say that they're going to be what? A mark of change, a mark of something better than before, rather than stand on their own platform on their own terms. And in doing so, because the foundation of that argument is so shaky, you know, it's like mud rather than solid ground. It means that being in these positions of power is so lonely, it creates certain kinds of neurosis, certain kinds of mental disease, whereby many of these so-called political leaders begin to think about other people coming after them because they know the platform that is the foundation for their rule is A, illegitimate, and B, doesn't service or serve their people. Most of these governments, like across the world, because Africa is not unique in this regard, are kleptocratic. That is, governments steal from the people through the government coffers, the treasury, or whatever institution may deal with currency, money, and valuation, right? They're kleptocratic. They steal from the government. They steal from the people. And in doing so, they enrich and enlarge, you know, their own personal net worth and that of their cronies and friends. But it's lonely because who can enjoy that with them? They don't trust anyone because they fear what? Another regime will topple them, right? And so this is the carryover from the geriatric problem in Africa and other parts of the world, by the way. Italy is facing this problem. Japan is facing this problem, among others, of ageism and being lonely. So being lonely at the top or being lonely in those parts of power carries over into our personal loneliness as we get older, because we too occupy some symbolic power or authority as elders. Now, I want to distinguish old people from elders, because elders are not simply people with age, that is having the wear and tear of having lived, you know, a life usually around late 50s, early 60s and beyond. But they have accrued a certain sense of what? Principles and values that have been part of their practice. And in practicing those principles as a lived experience, they're able to what? Share and dispense that principles or those principles and those values in the form of wisdom, in the form of knowledge, in the form of coded wisdom and guidelines that provide guide rails for those that are what? Younger than them who desire to listen and learn. Old people just talk to talk, whether they're coherent, whether there's any sense, whether there's any wisdom involved in their speech. See the difference between an elder and an old person? And so, excuse my laugh. And so getting old does have a similarity with people in political office in that there is a certain kind of symbolic power that is linked to being older, right? Certain authority, right? It's like a grandparent over their parent and grandchildren. There's a certain authority that's sort of assumed and baked into getting old, right? But in that, elders are also lonely, particularly when elder or old person, your friends have died or transitioned before you. Your age mates, people around your age, you know, are either in an old folks home if they're not there with you themselves, have either passed on, or they are no longer in their right mind, whether it's Alzheimer's or dementia or another brain degenerative disease. And even if you have all your marbles or have all your cognitive senses and abilities, it makes it even more lonelier, because when you're proverbially out of your mind, the things that may matter to you in terms of loneliness and companionship doesn't necessarily matter as much because you're not in your right mind, which is interesting, right? But when you are in your right mind, you have some physical ability, and let's say you're 60 and older or 55 and older, right? Then it becomes even more painful and even torturing. In fact, can be tormenting, right? To not have the people around you, friends and kinfolks, to visit you, to call you, to engage with you, right? And this is why people, for example, whether they're religious or not, will go to church or will join a religious grouping or another kind of group to play bingo or to, Scrabble club or to go out on these outings because they desire what all human beings desire, which is a sense of belonging to a group. However ill-equipped, ill-informed, and sometimes ill-advised that group may be, right? It's not because people want to believe or they want to necessarily be a cadre or a member of an organization. It's simply this: they don't want to be lonely. And so they join these organizations, these groupings, right? For the factor of having some companionship, someone to talk to, someone to laugh with, someone to share memories with, right? Again, if you have some or all of your cognitive abilities remaining 60 and beyond. More importantly, right? Don't be fooled. Older people, 55, 60, intimacy doesn't go away. That is, the drive for intimacy doesn't necessarily stop. Even if a woman has menopause, and she will tip generally around that age, if not much earlier, depending upon genetics, menopause or not, she's going to have intimate drives, intimate desires and feelings. Men do as well. What do they do with that when you're alone, right? It's another dilemma. For those who age and age without companionship, without a partner in a marriage or not, that they can rely on for comfort, for care, and companionship, right? The three C's: comfort, care, and companionship. Those are the three major, if not sole, ingredients that makes getting older, aging, with this kind of dignity and grace that many of us desire. But what happens when we don't get that? What happens when we are alone? We are looking and facing every night the cold side of that bed. When we are, as many elderly people in the United States, for example, are doing, they may be sharing an apartment or sharing a room because they can't afford the cost of rent, or because they have lost their home, because they can't afford the mortgage on the fixed income of Social Security income or their pension or whatever benefit they may have or lack of benefit, or because their medication regime, and by that I mean they're taking anywhere from 5 to 15 different kinds of medication to live a life, then the medication sometimes may add up cumulatively to more than what they can pay for their rent or for food. And they have to decide whether they eat or pay rent or take their medication. And when you're lonely, all these factors of life as an older, elderly person is magnified and is truncated to the point where it becomes that more what? Stressful and painful. I'll tell you another story. As a historian who studies, and many of you know, studies the history of Africa and its global diaspora, one of the features that I found most remarkable and most heart-wrenching when writing the book Transatlantic Africa, that some of you might be familiar with, which was this, is that in the early to mid-19th century, many of the captive enslaved Africans, by the way, a third of which were children, meaning below 18, and who were brought over to the Americas from Western Africa to West Central Africa and around the Cape of Good Hope into Southeast Africa, that is across what is now Mozambique and across the lower Swahili coast, that sort of large catchment area, right? From Senegambia to Angola to the Swahili coast. When these folks were being brought up to the Americas as captive Africans, and some of them were being quote unquote rescued by the British Navy squadron and their affiliates, those rescuers weren't rescues, which is not really the point of this story, but they're a feature of it, so I have to mention that. Many of them were actually captured and resettled in other parts of the Caribbean, some in Brazil, some in Trinidad and Tobago, some in Bahamas or the Bahama Islands, some in Jamaica, and other parts of the Caribbean basin. And in being resettled, what I found one of the most heartbreaking but very relevant part to this episode is that many of these Africans that were called liberated Africans because they were freed from being enslaved, but they were re-enslaved because they couldn't go home, and they were essentially beached or landed on these new territories where they basically had to resume a life as if they were enslaved. And so many of them passed away, died from one thing: depression. Yes, I said it, depression. Depression from being what? Alone. Not having their kinfolks, the native families from which they were torn from in their African homelands at the level of village, to province, to polity and state, right? These three scales of geographical size, but also populations, right? So from households to villages to provinces to polities, people were torn from these webs of what connection with real people, right? Kinfolks and non-kinfolks that had value in their lives. And so when they were dropped off and sort of, put into these depots, these European, near European colonies in the Americas, such as the islands I just named, plus the mainland of Brazil, many of them died on the roadsides, in these small little, villages that were created for quote unquote liberated Africans. They died from depression. They died, in other words, from loneliness, of not having kinfolks or having any means or ways to get back to those kinfolks, the people that matter the most in their life, right? So you don't have to be old to suffer from the feature of loneliness. But when loneliness hits or combines with old age, it produces a net effect of many of them exiting from this world because there's no desire to live anymore, right? And the lack of desire comes from the absence of what? Real companionship, real friendships, real loved ones that show care and concern and compassion, right? To these elderly and older people. Now, what can be done? There's a number of ways, number of strategies that can be employed. One is maintain your friendships in your 30s and 40s and 50s, because you never know how those friendships may morph into something more than that. Because it's not only you personally that will need companionship, so will those friends, right? Maintain your friendships. Don't be so quick to burn bridges, but if you must depart or exit a friendship, make sure it's on solid grounds and make sure that it's not on something that you leave on terrible terms, because things can change. Circumstances can change, right? Sometimes we make poor decisions. We all make poor decisions, and that could be one of them, right? So maintain your relationship as best as possible. If it's not worth it, and if it's something that you give hard attention to, then let it go. But make sure you have what? Multiple healthy relationships. Take care of your children because they will take care of you. And especially the ones, if you have multiple children, that you think as you raise them is not the most brightest, is not the most whatever, pay attention to that one of those ones because they will be the ones, ironically. You see, irony, like karma, has a way of biting us in the backside in the way that we don't anticipate. It'll be those ones that will come and care for you the hardest, not the ones you put through school, not the one you bust your behind for, not the ones that you put everything in line for. Those ones may say to you, as I heard some grown children, talk to their parents who are now alone and old. These children said to their parent, in this case, that I didn't ask you to birth me. Now, factually, they're right, but imagine how that carries over into the parent that put all of their proverbial eggs in that child's basket, right? Who busted behind, worked multiple jobs, sent them through schools, some of the best schools in their minds, that is a parent's mind, and took care of them. And the child essentially has moved on without any care and concern for that parent or those parents if both are alive, right? Third, make sure to maintain your health as best as possible, right? So desist from, all of those poor habits, you know what they are, the drinking, the drugs, and other kinds of degenerative habits that will come back to bite us. Now, we are our habits. So whatever your habits are, while you're in your 30s and 40s, make sure you are conscientious of them and begin to make some adjustments for the long haul. In other words, once you're in your 30s and 40s, it's not about the sprint anymore. That was in your teens into your early 20s, right? Because you can't sprint anymore. You're now into the marathon, the relay race, right? And in the marathon relay race, you are going to go through stages, and those stages are your baton. And in those stages, you want to make sure you carry with you the healthy habits of mind, right? Habits of physical body and health, habits of cleansing, of detox, of meditation, habits of, spiritual health and well-being, habits of Again, maintaining healthy relationships as best as you can, right? Now, clearly, it takes more than one person to have a relationship. That is true. But on your end, you make sure you maintain a certain kind of respect and decorum that will leave a lasting impact, even if the relation doesn't work out. It won't be on your soul and burden on your shoulders for not having done your part, right? So maintain healthy relations, children, kinfolks, friends that mean something to you, that value. And in turn, hopefully they value you, because those would be the ones that's going to be there with you and be there for you, right? And finally, as we age and get old, we can't fight the fact of age, right? No matter how many surgeries you do, no matter how many, kinds of, shaving all your hair. I see some people getting, fake behinds and fake, fake breasts or fake this, fake that. Um, just be yourself. Be natural is the best advice, because all those things are masking and hiding, and in many cases are exacerbating your age, right? Accept and honor the age, right? So I like my graying hair. Actually, I love it. My wife loves it, right? Which is what matters to me. And so embrace the process of aging, embrace the signs and features and symbolism of aging, right? Take great care of yourself, manage, monitor, right? And treat your relationships well, right? And in turn, these will pay dividends for you when you face the conundrum or the challenge, as my friend did, or friends did, of aging and loneliness. And so in the end of that conversation that I was listening to, the older guy said to the younger guy that, basically, what may seem exciting is actually a cover for loneliness. In other words, why is he in the club so often? Why is he, yes, he's a tenor, but why is he in the club so often? Why is he partying often? Why is he at the bar drinking almost by himself often, right? It's hiding and masking the loneliness, right? And as he does this over the years, he's aging, right? Aging and loneliness is a terrible combination, right? And so he told the younger guy, said, look, it's not all glams and glitter as you may think, right? Yes, sometimes they're exciting, but it's more depressive and downtime than there are uptimes, right? Love who loves you. Nurture it, grow it, protect it. Defend it if you must, right? Because in turn, that's who's going to be there with you and for you. But Baba and Nyame have been your guide and host. Please drop your questions, comments, experiences in the comment section below. Until next time, stay well.